I'm Joe Heisler, your host, coming to you from the BNN Live studios, Eggleston Square, Jamaica Plain, where tonight on the Boston Neighborhood Network, all of us here at BNN are wishing you a happy holiday, no matter what your practice or religion. And tonight, as we celebrate the end of one year and look forward to the new year, a new political year, lots to talk about and lots of thoughts to leave you with. And I'm pleased to have joining me tonight columnist extraordinaire. He writes for several publications, a fearless wordsmith who's never afraid to express his opinions. Tom Keane joins us as we look ahead to the new year and, of course, the presidential election, among many other political topics. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more of Talk of the Neighborhood. I'm Joe Heisler, your host. Happy holidays and Happy New Year as we look forward during this holiday season to the next political year. And, of course, it's a presidential election and lots to talk about. The latest poll numbers showing Donald Trump going above a critical threshold 40% amongst Republican voters in the primary. That's nationally. At the same time, polls in Iowa showing him slipping, dropping down to second. And one of many stories we'll be following here on BNN as we head towards the new year. I'm pleased to have joining us tonight prognosticator of sorts. He's a columnist who's never afraid to express his opinions and does so frequently in a number of publications, including, of course, the Boston Globe, Politico, Cognoscenti, and upcoming Boston Magazine. Tom Keane joins us.
Pleasure to be here, Joe.
Nice to have you here, my friend. Well, let's see, where shall we start? What shall we make of Donald Trump? I mean, the more outrageous his comments, or at least outrageous to many people, the higher his numbers seem to go, despite all the people predicting his eventual downfall.
Right. I mean, Donald Trump has been, the old jump the shark thing. It's from the TV show Happy Days when Fonzie jumped the shark and then the show went off the air. I mean, everyone thinks that no matter what he says, he's jumping the shark. He insulted a female journalist. He makes fun of another handicapped journalist. He calls immigrants from Mexico rapists. I mean, every single time people say, well, this is it. He's jumped the shark. He's no longer credible. His campaign's going to implode. Mm-hmm. And of course, the most recent one was when he issued a call. It's actually via a blog posting of his that there'd be a pause on the immigration of all Muslims to the United States, a religious test. Not the first time people have proposed a religious test in the United States, regrettably, but certainly the first in modern memory.
Well, and look what happens. I mean, he
and his
seems
numbers go
to
up.
defy the pundits. Right. And what does that say about the electorate, or at least the Republican electorate? What should you make of it? Because it kind of defies the traditional odds makers, suggesting that you have to be so super cautious about what you say. Anything you say could be used against you, and ultimately will.
So we've talked a lot on this show over the last number of years about the hyperpartisanship in Washington, D.C. And it's really easy for people to say, well, that's there's something wrong with these politicians and so on. It's not the politicians' fault. It's, in fact, the hyperpartisanship really reflects a vastly different set of values by different parts of the population of the United States. And you're really seeing that in this particular race. So you've got primary Republican voters who tend to veer to the right of what is a right-wing party, okay? And they clearly are not having a problem in terms of sort of this nativistic bent of Trump's. They are frightened, it's quite clear, and are willing to go to extreme measures to keep away the outsiders. And Trump is really tapping into that. Trump gets his audience. It's sometimes wonder whether Trump really is that way, but certainly Trump gets the people who might be voting for him or are going to be voting in those primaries. And then, and which is sort of illustrative of that, this split, is the fact that on the other side of the spectrum, you have so many people who find his statements almost unbelievable. I mean, it actually is incredible. And I get these emails all the time from people saying, clearly he can't be the nominee. The Republicans won't allow it. Well, the Republicans, if you mean the establishment or the elite of the Republicans, probably don't want to allow it. But it looks like the Republican Party, that is the electorate, really does want it to happen. So I think some of it is really a reflection of America that has very significantly different values on the right and the left. And what we're seeing right now is the vote of the right. And Donald Trump continues to garner those votes. It would not surprise me as the Republican field shrinks, and it's going to eventually have to shrink.
Tomorrow night is the last
last of
debate
the debates
before
Iowa.
the Iowa caucuses.
Right. And it would not surprise me that, as people drop out of the race, their votes go to other people. That means that some of those votes will also go to Donald Trump. And same nationwide polling that showed him at 41% is also really showing that, at least among Republicans, well over 2/3 find him acceptable as a president. So I do think it is very possible that Donald Trump is able to continue to ride this wave and actually become the nominee of the Republican Party.
Well, and of course, it's always one thing, when voters are offered a whole group of candidates, their favorite candidates, ultimately elections come down to the lesser of the evils for most people. And in the context of that schism, that split, it seems to be wide. Where does that go? What does it yield?
It's a
because
fascinating
some will be a loser, and therefore, does it get more heated, more well?
Well, let's just sort of play out the
More
Republican
explosive,
string.
yes.
So if Donald Trump continues to do well, it is a scenario that's out there is that he gets the first round vote in the convention in July, in which case he faces Hillary Clinton. And I think a lot of the Republican establishment correctly believes that that's going to be a disaster for the Republican Party.
And I should add, there are some polls showing that Hillary Clinton, at least at this point, would easily beat Trump.
And I think no question about it. I mean, and for me, it's just the math of you add up the various demographics that are out there. I mean, women don't like him. I mean, women are having a tough time with him. Hispanics are having a tough time with him. Immigrant communities are having a tough time with him. There's an enormous number of Muslims in the United States, millions. They're going to have a tough time, and they're voters as well. I think that he continues to alienate so many people down the road that it really gives Hillary a very easy path to the White House. It also probably means that the Republicans may very well be at risk of losing the House or the Senate, or both. I think that Trump's negative coattails are such that could really happen. And it would not surprise me to see that Trump really becomes a way for the Republican Party to sort of have a big rethink about what it is. And
force it to rethink. There's been talk about that after Mitt Romney lost, about reaching out to different constituencies that they had, I don't know about alienated, but certainly never courted. Yet this is the
that would have been Hispanics. I don't think they reached out.
This is the antithesis of that.
Right. Well, certainly with Trump it is. I mean, he certainly is not reaching out at all. Now, of course, look, that's only one scenario. I mean, there are other scenarios, clearly. Trump can get beaten. I mean, if it's a Ted Cruz, it may be just as bad for the Republican Party, quite frankly, because Cruz is also someone who would probably lose to Hillary Clinton. It's really hard. I mean, look, in general elections, it's the critical center that you have to take. Donald Trump and Ted Cruz are just not interested in those centrist voters. Cruz very explicit.
Well, and let me toss this into the mix here. Those same polls showing the one of the few Republican candidates that might beat Hillary Clinton is Marco Rubio,
right?
Senator from Florida.
Yeah.
And a lot of his campaign is, well, he's very conservative as well. At least what he's talked about so far. But he's really talked about the next generation, the new generation. And we see this going on in business, industry, throughout the country as, indeed, younger people take the reins of power. Are we approaching also that kind of split in the electorate? Not just left, right, but older, younger?
Not yet. I mean, it clearly, if you have a Marco Rubio up there, or even a Ted Cruz who's younger, There's a number. Maybe they try to make that argument. I don't think it's going to be all that compelling. I mean, Hillary's argument is she's going to be clearly playing the gender card, first female president. But I really think that the argument that's playing out here is insider versus outsider. And certainly within the Republican Party, that's what it is. Are you part of the Republican Party, more the establishment, or are you, the extreme outsider, which is really Cruz and Trump? I think that Marco Rubio is definitely something that the entire Republican Party could rally behind, just like Jeb would have been if he had a chance, but he doesn't have a chance anymore. Like Christie, they could clearly rally behind. These are all candidates that sort of are more mainstream in establishment, notwithstanding the fact that you're right, they're very conservative, or at least they give voice conservatively right now. But they've also shown themselves as people who are sort of willing to reach across the aisle and get things done. You don't really see that with the Ted Cruz.
Well, of course, most of the odds makers now suggest that Hillary Clinton will be the Democratic nominee. Right. And yet there is just as there is in the Republican Party, a hardcore left wing. I mean, Bernie Sanders describes himself as a democratic socialist. As a socialist, wasn't so many years ago that you might risk being arrested if he actually said that.
Or at least not be allowed to write for Hollywood
Those
movie.
people have no place to go.
They've got no place to go. And not only that, but I think you really saw this in the Democratic debates, which is that the differences on the Democratic side are far less. I mean, these are sometimes almost, for all that Bernie talks about himself as being a democratic socialist and the only one who's untethered to, the big money that's driving politics, his policies are not dramatically different from what is kind of the mainstream of the Democratic Party. And I suspect that Bernie would have no problem ending up supporting Hillary Clinton or Martin O'Malley or whoever might get into the race.
Well, of course, and back to Trump,
but he would have a hard time supporting anyone else.
He might have a hard time supporting. And he has suggested that if he isn't given a fair shake, so to speak, that he may run as an independent third-party candidate. And, of course, the last time we saw that, where Major H. Ross Perot ran, was the year that
that's called a Hillary victory.
Bill Clinton
Absolutely.
Won the presidency with a plurality of the vote.
Look, it's not incredible to say that the biggest fans of Donald Trump's campaign are Democrats. I mean, they love the fact that he is...
They're enjoying this.
I mean, he is causing extraordinary consternation within the Republican Party. The leadership doesn't know what to do about him. They're having secret behind doors meetings about how do we broker a convention so we don't have Trump as the nominee. They are deathly afraid that he goes and runs as a third-party candidate. Because, as the spokeswoman for the Republican Party said, that is a Hillary victory. You have a third party out there attracting conservative voters. Hillary Clinton wins in a walk.
And I got to ask you about this because I keep thinking, the idea of Trump potentially winning the presidential race, while at one time I thought was totally absurd. As I run into various people, I've got some neighbors. People you would never expect. You go, oh, well, what do you think about the presidential race? First thing out of their mouth is Trump. And is it so far-fetched to think that this guy could end up being president of the United States?
So I think that if you were Hillary Clinton, and assuming you're the nominee, to treat Donald Trump as nothing more than a fly on the wall that can be swatted would be a mistake. I think Hillary Clinton can win. But look at the way that presidential elections play out. They're state by state. So we know how California is going to vote.
Electoral college.
And we know how Massachusetts is going to vote. But what it is a handful of states, 10, that really are on the edge. Yep. And those are the ones where you're really going to have to pay a lot of attention as to who are her people there, who are his people going to be there. And I actually don't think people have looked real carefully at all of those states, really thinking about how does Trump do in this state versus a Hillary Clinton. I think she wins. I mean, I think he has alienated so many people that I do think she wins. But on the other hand, I thought Martha Coakley was going to beat Scott Brown. So.
Well, again, Tom Keane, columnist extraordinaire, writes for several publications, former of course, former Boston City Councilor, never afraid to express his opinions here tonight as we look forward to the year ahead, the political year ahead, and lots to talk about here. I want to talk a little bit about the the aftermath, the reaction, really, to, first of all, of course, the shootings, bombings that took place in Paris at the hands of terrorists, and then more recently, of course, the shootings that took place in San Bernardino, California, by a couple there. It's not clear if they were affiliated with ISIS or Al Qaeda or any particular group, or just were extremists. But it's generated I think in some, a palpable fear, and we experienced the bombing here, the marathon bombing, and I think people saw what could happen in a situation like that. Where does this go? Where does that kind of reaction to it go? As we said, Trump says, well, we'll ban all Syrian refugees, we'll ban all Muslims, and nothing happened. But there is a fear out there.
Well, and Americans have done this. Let's understand. We interned Japanese Americans in World War II. We put them in prison camps. And we apologized for it. Eventually, was it Ronald Reagan who had apologized for it? We eventually apologized for it. But we did it. And we did it under a Democratic president, Franklin Roosevelt. So there is part of, whether it's, I think all people have this kind of reaction, and it's a reaction of fear, and they're willing to kind of let go of the normal sense of fairness and due process they might have to other people because of that particular fear. And because of the way that terrorism works, and this is the whole idea behind terrorism, it is, within, this isn't a war in the sense of the number of people who are killed. It's been a relatively, if you think about it, small number of people. But the thing is, people don't know where it strikes next. And they don't know who is going to be the one who actually delivers the gunshot or the bomb or throws the bomb. And so you see this anger and fear. It is, by the way, anger and fear that clearly Donald Trump is capitalizing on. But the problem is that I think Trump and the other Republicans are onto something, which is that there has seemed to be, on the part of the Obama administration, kind of this thinking that it really is not that big of a deal. And the news that is coming out tonight, for example, is that the San Bernardino bombers had in fact been radicalized, particularly the woman, well before she ever came in. That she had postings on social media, including Facebook, announcing her commitment to jihad, but that there was an internal policy within the US government that they wouldn't look at social media in terms of trying to vet someone for a fiancé visa. Now that apparently they're doing a top to bottom review in the White House to change that. But there is this kind of attitude a little bit that it wasn't being treated seriously enough as a problem. I think Paris kind of brought that all to the fore again, and then San Bernardino has really brought it right into our backyards.
Well, and of course, Barack Obama was the candidate of hope, the candidate of all people, of all persuasions. Is there some fatigue there, or is it just those that shout the loudest seem to be being heard? And some of it is, I think you could say hateful almost.
Oh, I don't think I would say almost. It's just hateful. I don't know why you qualify it. Yeah, some of it is clearly very hateful. And again, it's been done in our past, and it's very, very regrettable. It is, the whole idea behind America is that we judge you, as an individual and not as part of a group.
I mean, we're a nation of immigrants other than the Native Americans.
That's right.
Yet, that seems to be lost in this whole...
It's completely lost in this thing, and again, it's fear that's causing people to lose it. I'd also point out, though, that don't sugarcoat the past. We may be a nation of immigrants, but if you go back and look at history, our immigration laws have always tried to restrict the next person who tries to come through. So some immigrants come in, and the first thing they do is they support laws restricting other immigrants from coming in, and it's been pretty consistent through the 18th and through the 19th and 20th century that this has actually really happened. So I don't see now being necessarily all that different. It's just another group we're going after. It's clearly regrettable, and some of the language clearly is hateful.
But in this atmosphere, do you see the opportunity or the possibility, I guess might be, that we could see somebody like Trump actually win? I keep coming back to that because I keep thinking of my neighbors who are, they're great people.
You need to move, Jack. You need to move.
Well, it might be the best neighbors I've ever had, and they're like, they're Trump supporters.
Yeah, so the same polls that had been showing Republicans really approving what Donald Trump was saying, and there was a Bloomberg poll that came out right afterwards that showed like 2/3 of Republican voters supported Trump on this, but the reverse was true with Democrats. And with those in the center, if you took all Americans, clearly they did not support something like this at this point. But I think that what Trump is doing is giving articulation to this sense that we haven't done enough. And he may, in fact, be kind of like the guy who's just throwing stuff against the wall and sees what sticks. And this may be a lot of posturing and bluffing on his part, but
yet it's having an effect.
But it's having an effect, and what he's doing is he's showing that he cares more than anyone else. Certainly cares more than Barack Obama, cares more than the rest of the Republican field. And he does have his finger on the pulse of what people are afraid of.
Well, much to look forward to. Of course, the Iowa caucus is coming up in 7 weeks, and immediately thereafter, of course, the first in the nation primary next door here in New Hampshire. And while Donald Trump has slipped to second, according to the recent polls in Iowa, behind Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, in New Hampshire, he continues to maintain a strong lead, and although
by like 20 points.
Yeah, right. But there is some movement there for, I think, the first time. People like Chris Christie that weren't conservative. He was pushed off the debate stage at the most recent debate. Now back on in the next, and we shall see. Of course,
by the way, it is fascinating how Iowa and New Hampshire differ. So Ted Cruz is now neck and neck, if not ahead, in Iowa. And of course, Iowa's crazy because it's a caucus, and so it's impossible to predict. It's not voters in the traditional way. In New Hampshire, Cruz barely appears. I mean, he's getting nothing in New Hampshire. And it looks like Trump is really going to take New Hampshire.
Well, but back to the issue that Trump is trumpeting, who would have thought, or should we be surprised that our own governor, Charlie Baker, endorsed the idea of restricting refugees and immigrants from Syria and the Middle East. Were you surprised by that?
I was surprised by his initial comments. I think that Baker would say to you at this point that was somewhat misinterpreted. That in fact he was more saying that he wanted to find out what the process was and to get comfortable with the process. And I think he has walked it back a bit since then. But yeah, I was surprised by his initial comments because Baker has generally been, very matter of fact as governor, has not been
boring as some columnists, but despite his incredibly high poll numbers.
Well, he's tending to the business of government, and rather than trying to make waves.
Well, we shall see what Mother Nature has in store for him as well. Of course,
it's going to be warm.
Maybe
that's another prediction.
That might be another plum thrown his way. Of course, as we enter the winter here. And,
couldn't he just blame last winter on Deval? Wasn't that
I think that, and I don't know if Mayor Walsh has to carry any of that as well, but he's got a year on him. What about Marty Walsh? How's he doing? Is he? What have you been able to figure out? What is behind now? Depending upon who you talk to, they've spent perhaps upwards of $1 million,
over $1 million at this point,
litigating the whole issue of the site, the placement of the Wynn Resorts Casino in Everett, saying they haven't taken care of Charlestown and the traffic issues and et cetera, et cetera. Wynn seems to be kind of reaching out, or maybe that's just good PR. I'm not quite sure, but the mayor seems to be having none of it.
The lawsuit which the city lost, the judge was very harsh in her language about Boston's filing. and thought that the language was overboard in terms of being unnecessarily insulting, and basically dismissed all of the city's claims. What was really striking about that lawsuit is that it didn't. There are ways, if you're mayor of Boston, that you want to cut a deal with someone and get something for the city. There are ways to do that. And a lawsuit may be part of your arsenal in terms of getting that done as a means of forcing people to
But some would say at this point,
but at this point, this isn't a negotiation anymore. This is because this is a case where it's gasoline's been poured on, and
is it about money though, or is it something personal there?
If it were about money, we could have come to a deal, right? I mean, it's like I want this many millions, and you say to Win, I want 50 million. He says it's going to be 25, and whatever it is, you come up with a number. And maybe use the lawsuit to force the number to be higher, but it's just a negotiation. This does not seem to be a negotiation. I'm like you, I can't figure out the end game here. And it appears the city continues to be involved in it. Now it talks about it as protecting the citizens of Charlestown, but I don't know what the protections are that it's seeking.
Well, of course, Mayor Walsh, despite the failure of the Olympics bid and a few other things, none of it seems to be sticking to him, and the city, may be fortunate in other ways. And I'm thinking about all the recent incidents involving police shootings of civilians, most of them African Americans, that have spawned, in Chicago, calls for the resignation
of Rahm Emanuel.
Of Rahm Emanuel, and in Los Angeles, of course. Reverberations there as well, and in many cities around the U.S. Yet, is Boston just lucky? Is it a result of some kind of enlightened leadership in the police department? Commissioner Evans, of course, has always been known as being a straightforward, forthright man as far as that, and very popular on the force. But what's at play there?
So this plays out as the police versus the people. That's the way it's playing out. And particularly within cities, it's playing out as the police versus black citizenry. And there is this sense about the police as an occupying force, particularly within the poorest neighborhoods. And that creates a real distrust and schism between the two sides. Every incident of violence that occurs is then seen through the prism of it's the police against us. Sometimes, obviously, those shootings are justified. But many times, I think what we've seen is it's hard to justify them at all. They seem an overreaction on the part of the police as well. But there is that, it's the occupying force. And I remember from decades ago, even within Boston, it was sort of the attitude was the police is the occupying force, that they're the only thing saving the city from descent into pre-civilization.
So
times.
would you support body cameras for police officers?
Let's stay with why isn't it happening in Boston? Okay. I think some of it's luck. I think some of it is luck. But I also think you've seen a couple of incidents lately where the police have really responded very, very quickly in terms of releasing videos, reaching out to leadership within the black community, showing them the videos, and trying to, as much as possible, quell any anger or distrust. I also think that Boston, which actually with Commissioner Bratton really started to be in the lead in kind of community policing and has never really abandoned that model, has moved away from the model of the police as kind of an occupying force to police as, as peacekeepers, if you will.
And
actually
and as believable.
As believable and as connecting with the community. And some of this is that you have the cop on the beat. You're restoring the cop on the beat. So the person who's showing up isn't just some person you've never seen before, but is the same police officer you see every single day. And so he's part of the fabric of a neighborhood. And I think Boston's done that really well.
Well, but there's some
and that helps.
Evidence, some suggestion, if not here, although there's, I think, some here, the whole Black Lives Matter movement has kind of taken hold in many cities. And some would say perhaps it's the start of a new civil rights chapter or struggle or what have you. And of course, we had situation here where they block traffic on I-93, but in Minneapolis, in Chicago, in many other cities, and indeed the presidential candidates, at least on the Democratic side, seem to be reaching out. And is this the start of something new here?
Well, so there's two pieces. One is the police thing, and then the other is kind of the Black Lives Matter thing, which is I actually think a larger issue than just the police thing, because it really is true. I think that when there's murders in any city, if it's a poor African American person, it really doesn't make front page news. But it will make front page news if it's, say, a well-off white person. And it is the way we treat this differently. And, and it is, I mean,
so it's been kind of waiting to happen.
It's been kind of waiting. And that's what the Black Lives Matter thing really means. I mean, the riposte that everyone gives is, oh, well, all lives matter, which is true. But the point about the Black Lives Matter movement is that too often Black lives are ignored.
And in years past,
right,
sometimes totally ignored.
Right. And so to try to push it to the forefront, and it's like, and I actually wrote this piece shortly after the Boston Marathon bombings, but as tragic as they were and the outpouring of support for the people who were killed there, many, many more people have been killed as a result of shootings, including innocent people as a result of shootings in Boston's poorest communities, and
totally
there's no
senseless
fund out there for them.
Well, the other issue, and it's somewhat related, although it's somewhat different, is the effect it's having, and I'm thinking about the University of Missouri, where the students there threatened to, the football team refused to play. Many members, at least those African American, refused to play, and you're seeing it in other campuses as well. Students demanding more in the way of faculty, of color, and a variety of issues. But it's also kind of raised this whole issue of, free speech, what you can and cannot say. Are you sufficiently committed to a variety of issues, most revolving around diversity? And I'm thinking of Yale and some
the Halloween thing.
Yes,
that was pretty funny.
Yeah, Brandeis here locally.
Brandeis,
yeah,
well,
sure.
Then Amherst actually was even the best. I thought, where people put up placards advocating for the First Amendment, and a whole bunch of students want to have them expelled because they were advocating for the First Amendment.
Well, and for people that work in the profession, the journalism profession, there was also a rally out there where journalists were excluded,
right, this is
unless they voiced support for the aims and goals of the organization.
Right.
And
so, what do you make of it? It's actually kind of a big issue. And within colleges and universities, you also have to look back some number of years. Colleges and universities used to be kind of cloistered communities back in the 50s. In the 60s, you had kind of the turmoil of Vietnam and the sexual revolution and so on. And all of a sudden, students who then started to get the vote at age 18, as well as all the other perquisites of adulthood, such as drinking, went to students of 18. And they said, look, if we're old enough to go to Vietnam and fight and die, then we're adults as far as everything else is concerned. So the colleges actually, they got rid of parietal rules. They basically just made the college campuses were places where you went to school. And they were no longer kind of, in loco parentis again.
Yeah. And you could take up whatever cause you want.
Take up whatever cause you want. And I think then now you've seen a shift back. Now the sexual mores thing, the parietals has not come back in. But I think in many other respects, colleges have started to become more like parents again. And the kids seem to embrace that in a way. And one of the clear ways you've seen that is in the rise of speech codes. Colleges say, well, we want this to be a safe and protective community, as if it's not part of the real world, and the students in their charge are not adults, but really are still children. And the students seem to buy into that notion that they're still kind of children and need to be told what they can say and what they can't say. And I see a lot of kind of the extreme political correctness you see, like the Halloween thing, which bears talking about because people don't know. Yale University, right before Halloween, the administration sends out an email to all the students telling them about, they have to be careful about the costumes you wear so you don't offend anybody. Now, you would have thought that the students were offended by that email because it's kind of like treating them like kids, like they don't know what they're doing. But that wasn't what offended the students. What offended the students was one professor who said, "You're treating them like children." And they were outraged at the fact that one professor was thinking they should be treated as adults and should be actually the ones to make up their own minds on costumes rather than having university decide what they could wear. And it really was sort of this combination of we're still children and we want to be told what to think and how to say. And I think in a broad way, it's that the students, and again, it's only some students, and you have to be careful about painting this with a very broad brush, because many students don't buy into this at all. But certainly some don't get the idea behind the First Amendment, which is that you don't fight bad speech by trying to prohibit bad speech, you fight bad speech with more speech. That's the whole idea in terms of how we argue things out in the public sphere, and certainly colleges and universities, which are supposed to be the areas of inquiry, and where really, for the first time after high school, you are exposed to new controversial ideas that may upset you, That's what they're supposed to be all about. And to be a citizen in America, particularly with the First Amendment, really requires you have a tough skin. And you need to be able to have this kind of debate.
So is it political correctness run amok?
It is, a little bit. And I also think that as with many of these things, it's going to run out of steam. College, life, think about a college student. You come out of high school, you're oftentimes very cocooned. You're a very insular community within your family, within your high school. There's not necessarily a lot of diversity. And then you come into a college and university, and to a degree, you're just not ready for it. And it's hard to make that transition. It's hard to make that transition.
Again, tonight on Talk to the Numbers, we look to the year ahead, and it could be a year of turmoil. It's certainly an interesting political year. Joining me, Tom Keane, the columnist for a variety of publications here tonight. We've got just a minute or two left. How about the ballot issues? Let's see. Legalize marijuana, or regulate marijuana. Take your pick. Regulate farm products and how they're raised.
Right. Is this the pigs one?
Yes,
yeah, okay.
yes. A number of very interesting. Of course, the charter schools. Are they just setting up potential action by the legislature to try and force the legislature to?
Well, I think the charter school one clearly is trying to do that. And I should say as an aside, because I always do need to do this when I talk about schools or charter schools, I actually work as general counsel for a nonprofit that in Washington, D.C. that does some charter schools, so just be aware of my biases here. But I think that the ballot question probably was intended to try to force the legislature into action, but I'm actually thinking that given the way the Mass Teachers Association is reacting, that probably it's going to go to a ballot question. Right now, the polling looks like the question passes. MTA is obviously thinking that they can defeat it. On the marijuana question, there's two competing proposals out there.
Although it looks like one of them may not qualify for the ballot.
Yeah, and I think, so one of the proposals is actually very much modeled on how we handle liquor, which quite frankly is an inferior way to do it, because all that does is create an oligopoly and creating another distributorship.
But
it's not
tax
a great way
revenue.
Well, the other way would have allowed tax revenue too. So again, these things pass. The legislature can always fix it. That's, by the way, it's really important to note that, yes, when it passes, it is law, but you can always amend a law, and the legislature always can, and sometimes these laws just need to be amended. I do think the marijuana one passes at this point. It'll be interesting over the next year to see some of the debate over it, because the experiences, say, out of Colorado have not necessarily been 100% easy. There are some issues that are starting to develop in terms of marijuana. On the other hand, personally speaking, I think to criminalize it is crazy. And on the other hand, I too am reluctant to think that we're now going to start turning it into something that's just commonly used, and that we are.
Everybody's going to have a little patch or a little pot.
I mean, I have to tell you, as soon as you tax something, the state gets an interest in making sure people use it, which is really a problem.
One of many things that will be on the ballot, of course, no gubernatorial race for 2 more years, but some interesting local races, and we'll be covering all of those here on Talk to the Neighbors and here on BNN TV. Well, I want to thank Tom Keane for coming in and joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
As always, enjoy having him, hearing him, sharing his opinions, and in the year ahead, we'll have more guests like him talking about a variety of issues facing the city of Boston, the Commonwealth of Mass, indeed the country. And until then, for the entire staff and crew here at Boston Neighborhood Network, I'm Joe Heisler, your host, wishing you a happy holiday and a happy new year. We'll see you then.